The air inside the CNN studio was thick, not with heat, but with the kind of tension you feel before lightning strikes. Every camera was fixed, every light dialed in to precision. Producers whispered into headsets. Studio staff moved like shadows behind the scenes. This wasn't just another televised debate, it was a political powder keg waiting for a spark. Karoline Leavitt sat tall beneath the harsh stage lights, her face calm, composed, almost unnaturally still. Across from her, at the opposite podium, sat Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, her expression electric, already animated before a single question had been asked. Between them stood Anderson Cooper, polished and poised, acting as moderator for what was being billed as the most critical energy policy discussion of the year. Before we dive in, tell us, where are you watching from? Also subscribe. Outside the walls of the studio, America was already divided. Rising gas prices, inflation, and energy grid failures had turned kitchen table conversations into battlegrounds. The Green New Deal wasn't just a proposal, it was a line in the sand. And this debate, promoted for weeks by CNN, was meant to bring two worlds face to face. Anderson opened with a neutral tone. Tonight, we're joined by Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Karoline Leavitt, two voices representing two very different visions for America's energy future. Let's begin. AOC didn't waste a second. She launched into a detailed, rapid-fire monologue, her words laced with urgency. Climate catastrophe, environmental justice, corporate greed. Every point she made landed like a hammer. She painted a picture of a dying planet and labeled fossil fuel companies as the executioners. Her voice carried the intensity of someone who had repeated these lines on college campuses, at rallies, in Congress. Cheers erupted from the younger half of the audience. Environmental activists, students, progressive voters. They clapped, whistled, some even stood in solidarity before being asked to sit down by stage managers. It was clear where the momentum lay, but Karoline didn't flinch. She didn't interrupt, she waited. When her turn finally came, she didn't come out swinging. Instead, she spoke with quiet strength. We all want a cleaner planet, she began, but we don't get there by gutting the very workforce that keeps this country running. There was a shift in the room, subtle but real. You can't preach justice while taking away livelihoods, she continued, her voice steady. You want to talk about Maria in Beaumont, Texas? She's a single mom working at a refinery to feed her two kids. Or Marcus in Lake Charles. He's been on the rigs for 30 years, sending his daughter to college. You talk about carbon emissions, but your plan doesn't leave room for them. A murmur stirred in the older segment of the audience. This wasn't a denial of climate change. This was a defense of the working class. A challenge, not just to policy, but to narrative. Anderson Cooper raised his hand to moderate, but AOC was already leaning forward. That's the problem, Karoline, she said, her tone tightening. You wrap polluter protection in patriotic language and expect people not to notice. That's not leadership, that's surrender to corporate lobbyists. Still, Karoline remained unmoved. I'm not defending corporations, she replied calmly. I'm defending Americans you've forgotten. They're not on the cover of magazines, they don't trend on social media, but they keep your lights on, they keep your car moving, and they're not expendable. It was then that the temperature in the room shifted from tense to combustible. AOC narrowed her eyes and, in a voice laced with condescension and sharpness, delivered the line that would ignite the internet. Sit down, girl. The words hit like a slap across the face, not just to Karoline, but to everyone watching who had ever been dismissed, diminished, or demeaned. The air was sucked from the room. Anderson Cooper's pen stopped mid-note. The control room froze. For a full second, even the cameras seemed to hesitate, as if unsure whether to continue recording or give the moment space to breathe. The audience, already split in their allegiances, collectively held its breath. It wasn't just a political jab, it was personal. Sit down, girl. 3 words that weren't policy or data or debate. They were something else. A put down, a power play, a moment that crossed the invisible line between disagreement and disrespect. Screens lit up, notifications exploded, but on stage, Karoline Leavitt did not blink. She didn't flinch, she didn't smirk, she didn't fire back with venom, she just stared straight ahead, composed as ever, and slowly, deliberately, she leaned toward the microphone, her face unreadable, her eyes locked on the congresswoman who had just tried to shut her down. The room waited. Everyone expected fire. Instead, what they got was the slow, slow, simmering rise of something far more dangerous to opponents: conviction. The moment stretched like a pulled wire, silent, taut, and ready to snap. Karoline Leavitt sat motionless for a beat longer than expected, not out of hesitation, but control. Her fingers rested gently on the edge of the podium, her breathing even. It was the calm before a storm she never needed to unleash. She didn't rise to the bait. She didn't match tone for tone. Instead, she leaned slightly forward, her voice barely above a conversational volume. And yet, somehow, it carried. I'll stand, because the people I represent don't have the luxury of sitting this out. That was it. No shouting, no clever one-liner, no viral zinger crafted for headlines. Just truth, spoken without theatrics. And that truth, said plainly and without bitterness, detonated louder than any yell could have. The audience didn't know how to react. At first, there was no laugh track, no applause sign, no cue, just raw tension, then a ripple of claps from the back, then a few more from the sides. Soon, a wave of applause began to rise. Not thunderous, not frenzied, but steady, like rain beginning to fall. AOC shifted in her seat. For the first time that night, she blinked a little faster. Her rhythm had been broken. The momentum, once entirely hers, had begun to slide. Anderson Cooper, professional to the core, turned to redirect the conversation, but even he couldn't hide the flicker of surprise that crossed his usually unreadable face. He knew what had just happened. Everyone in that room did. But it wasn't just a studio moment. It was something bigger. Across the country, the internet caught fire. Clips of the exchange hit Twitter, now X, within seconds. One video of the "sit down girl" line and Karoline's response hit 1 million views in under 15 minutes. By the end of the night, it had been reposted by conservative influencers, moderate commentators, and even a few liberal thinkers who found the phrase off. She Stood started trending. It wasn't just a conservative reaction. It was a visceral response from people of all stripes who saw something they didn't expect. A young woman publicly diminished and choosing grace over retaliation. Podcasters dropped emergency episodes. Pundits on both Fox News and MSNBC scrambled for takes. Editorial writers dusted off their keyboards. "She didn't take the bait," wrote one columnist. "She took the higher road, and it made all the difference." Back at the studio, the debate continued, technically, but the mood had shifted. Anderson did his best to salvage balance, steering the conversation back to policy, grid reliability, subsidies for renewables, job retraining. But the audience wasn't fully listening anymore. They had seen what they came for, and they knew it. Even AOC's next responses, more impassioned appeals for environmental reform and social equity, landed flatter. Not because the content had changed, but because the tone of the room had. Her words no longer rode the current. She was now pushing against it. Karoline, on the other hand, seemed to settle more deeply into her seat, as if the moment had clarified something for her. She didn't need to win the whole debate. She had already won the part that would echo beyond the evening, the moment that showed who could remain composed when provoked, who could take the hit and still speak for others. And that's what made her dangerous, to opponents and doubters alike. She didn't just make her point, she embodied it. The next morning, media coverage exploded. The headlines varied in tone, but not in focus. Debate flashpoint: AOC's "sit down girl" sparks national uproar. CNN: "Grace under fire. Karoline Leavitt stuns in town hall showdown." Fox News: "A line crossed. The moment that stole the energy debate." Politico: "When confidence turns into condescension. AOC's rare misstep." The Atlantic news outlets played the clip on repeat, each dissecting the tone, the intent, the aftermath. Commentators from both sides argued over the meaning of the phrase. Was it sexist? Was it ageist? Was it just a poor choice of words? Was Karoline overpraised for simply not reacting? But even critics had to admit it had landed poorly. What was meant to diminish had somehow elevated. What was intended to shut down had opened a floodgate. In small towns and energy communities across the country, the clip played differently. At a diner in Odessa, Texas, a waitress rewound the clip on her phone and showed a regular. "See? That's what I'm talking about." In the break room of a refinery outside Baton Rouge, workers watched on a mounted TV, nodding slowly, one of them muttering, "She's got steel in her spine, that one?" Across social media, real people, not just bots and pundits, shared their stories. A coal miner's daughter in West Virginia posted, "I've been told to sit down more times than I can count. Glad someone finally stood up and stayed standing." A young mother in rural Ohio wrote, I don't even agree with her politics, but I felt that. She reminded me of my sister. This wasn't about left or right anymore. This was about how you carry yourself when you're cornered, and how one moment, one controlled moment, can rewrite the entire room. Karoline didn't release a victory statement. She didn't launch a press tour or post a flashy edit. She didn't need to. The moment spoke louder than any follow-up tweet ever could. She showed that leadership wasn't always about dominating a conversation. Sometimes it was about knowing when to say less and let others do the talking for you. As the news cycle continued to churn, pundits began asking the question no one expected just a few days prior. Is Karoline Leavitt the future of the conservative movement? But to those who knew her or had followed her rise, the better question might have been, was this the moment the country started listening? When the CNN town hall wrapped, the studio lights dimmed, but the glare of the moment hadn't faded. If anything, it had grown hotter. Backstage, producers and political aides scrambled to regroup. There was no post-debate handshake, no shared laugh off camera. The chill between Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Karoline Leavitt had only deepened. They exited opposite sides of the set, trailed by their teams, phones already buzzing with alerts from every platform imaginable. Karoline's phone was blowing up, not just from political allies, but from unexpected voices. Former opponents, journalists, veterans, oil field workers, single moms, even a handful of liberal columnists who had no love for her politics but recognized what she'd just pulled off. In the green room, someone handed her a phone showing a trending hashtag, "She didn't sit." Karoline just smiled politely, then asked for a glass of water. She wasn't going to ride a wave that wasn't hers to create. The moment, she knew, wasn't about her. It was about what she represented to a country tired of yelling matches and identity plays. Meanwhile, AOC's team was already in damage control. Back at campaign headquarters, the mood was tight. The phrase "sit down, girl" had not aged well, and it had barely been an hour. Social media, which often functioned as AOC's playground, had turned unpredictable. Yes, many of her loyal followers defended her, insisting the phrase was misinterpreted. It's slang, some posted. It was casual, but others, particularly women, weren't so quick to excuse it. "It's the girl part," one progressive activist tweeted. That's what made it feel dismissive. And coming from another woman? Yikes. A prominent feminist blogger posted a reaction video, deadpanning. "If a man had said that to a young woman on national television, we'd be tearing his career apart. And rightly so. So what are we doing here?" AOC didn't issue an apology that night. Instead, she posted a vague tweet. "Tired of fossil fuel defenders using people as shields for corporations. I stand by truth, always." But the tweet didn't land. It wasn't a response. It was a redirect, and America noticed. The media rolled on. Morning shows cleared their schedules. Good Morning America, The Today Show, and Morning Joe each ran extended segments analyzing the exchange. Body language experts were invited, debate coaches gave their takes, political psychologists weighed in. One CNN analyst admitted, "Look, regardless of where you stand politically, this was a rare moment. Karoline Leavitt didn't just win points. She shifted the entire room without raising her voice. That's not common in today's political theater." Conservative media, of course, ran with it, but this time, even moderate outlets gave space to the idea that something different had occurred. Karoline wasn't being celebrated just because she had owned her opponent. She was being recognized for something the public had been missing: composure, clarity, and restraint. Then came the interviews. The following morning, Karoline accepted an invitation to appear on Fox and Friends. The segment was quiet, measured, and deliberately non-triumphal. "I wasn't there to go viral," she said plainly. "I was there to speak for people who feel forgotten every time the conversation turns to policy. They work in industries no one in Washington wants to admit we still need." She didn't even reference AOC's remark directly. That silence, too, spoke volume. Later that day, she appeared on a small local station in New Hampshire via Zoom. When asked how she felt in the moment AOC told her to sit down, she replied, "Honestly, I wasn't offended. I was focused. That's what happens in debates. People try to rattle you, but I didn't come there to be rattled. I came to represent." That phrase, "I came to represent," now started making its own rounds. It was clipped, turned into a TikTok audio. It wasn't a soundbite designed by PR consultants. It felt real. In contrast, AOC held off on appearing in public. For 48 hours, she was unusually quiet. Her next interview came days later on MSNBC, where she defended her position, clarified her energy proposals, and subtly walked back the now infamous line without ever directly addressing it. Look, we're in a moment of crisis. The urgency sometimes pushes people, but my focus remains on protecting the planet and the people on it. But by then, the moment had already solidified. No one was denying her passion, but the question on everyone's lips had changed. Was she speaking for the people or just over them? Behind the scenes, Democratic strategists were split. Some viewed it as a blip. A bad look, yes, but nothing fatal. Others were more concerned. Focus groups began revealing that voters, particularly independent women and blue-collar moderates, found the exchange troubling. It was condescending. One woman in a Pennsylvania swing district said in a post-debate survey, "I like AOC's energy, but that felt like a power trip." A man in Michigan put it bluntly, "Leavitt didn't take the bait. That takes guts." Republican strategists, meanwhile, saw a moment of opportunity. Karoline Leavitt, long viewed as sharp but under the radar, had just walked into the national spotlight with grace under pressure. She wasn't just a spokesperson anymore. She was a potential torchbearer. The moment wasn't dying down. It was gaining shape. Columnists began crafting a larger story arc. It wasn't just AOC versus Leavitt. It was a generational, stylistic, and cultural clash. One side representing urgency, activism, and sweeping change. The other representing stability, industry, and measured progress. The debate had been framed as a policy showdown, but America wasn't talking about numbers or climate charts. They were talking about character. Meanwhile, Karoline returned to work. She didn't bask in the attention. Her schedule remained packed with town halls, refinery visits, small batch interviews, and community roundtables. At one such event in Louisiana, a retired oil worker approached her, shaking her hand. "You didn't just talk for us," he said. "You didn't yell, didn't pout. You stood like we stand, quiet but firm." She smiled and said nothing more than "thank you." It was enough. If you like this video, then subscribe.